Hello, and welcome again to this video and this course, Mass Media and American Politics. Today, I want to go through a couple of the more um, kind of powerful arguments that have taken place in mass media and social science more broadly, even than political science. And there's three, I guess, or two pairs of author teams that I want to take you through the arguments of that have been very influential in terms of the way that a certain segment, perhaps, of social critique has been really has gained a lot of adherence and a lot of credibility and a lot of persuasive power in social science in our larger kind of media conversation. So those two arguments they come from, let's see, the two author teams are Adorno and Horkheimer and Chomsky and Herman. And Adorno and Horkheimer are writing in 1944, and Chomsky and Herman are writing in, I believe, 1987. I might have that year a little bit off. But what I want to do today is go through some of Adorno and Horkheimer's arguments first and foremost, and if we have time, this will only be a 30-minute video. We're going to go through Chomsky. If we don't have time, I'll post another video. So there's Adorno and Horkheimer, just to give you a little bit of background, were academic refugees from Nazi Germany. They were Jewish, and they established something called, in Frankfurt, it was called the Frankfurt School, or the Institute for Social Research. The Institute for Social Research has become a very popular name for social research think tanks affiliated with universities since then. But this one was kind of transferred as a think tank, basically a team of academic intellectuals who were fleeing Nazi Germany and were kind of social philosophers. They were fleeing Nazi Germany, and they ended up at Columbia University in New York in the 1930s and 40s. And they had, just in full disclosure, they had a certain background of that was heavily influenced by Marx, and they're even called kind of well, I think today they're probably called cultural Marxists. So this is just by way of background to tell you that they've had a pretty big influence on how a certain frame of reference is viewed and seen in the larger kind of social science world. But also just to introduce you to the writing itself, and just to let you make up your own mind about how much purchase you think it really should have. And so to do that, I took one of the central piece of work that's has to do with the media that is most often cited by people in the writings of Adorno and Theodor Adorno and his writing partner Max Horkheimer. And Adorno and Horkheimer wrote an entire book called The Dialectic of Enlightenment, where they were criticizing the modern state of the world as a consequence of the abandonment of the Enlightenment. And they were attempting to kind of bring that social critique from the 19th century into a more modern context. And so they were writing during and after World War II. And one of the things they did was they specifically addressed the growth of the new kind of popular culture that was pervasive in the United States, as well as the rest of the Western world. And in 1944, World War II was still raging, and but there had already been a really huge growth of radio um, and movies and even to a certain extent a little bit of television. But I think you'll see for yourself that some of these writings are still, if they were ever relevant, they're as relevant today as they were then. And so, and again, it's up to you to decide whether or not you think that there is, that they have a persuasive case to make. So I thought I'd read a couple of the quotations that I took from their book, The Dialectic of Enlightenment, and specifically the chapter dealing with what they call the culture industry. So, so here goes. And please forgive some of the gendered language I am quoting. The man with leisure has to accept what the culture manufacturers offer him. Art for the masses has destroyed the dream, but still conforms to the tenets of that dreaming idealism which critical idealism balked at. Not only are the hit songs, stars, and soap operas cyclically recurrent and rigidly invariable types, but the specific content of the entertainment itself is derived from them and only appears to change. The details are interchangeable. And so they go on to talk about the kind of patterns of rise and fall of a hero in movies, and all these they call them ready-made cliches to be slotted in anywhere. They never do anything more than to fulfill the purpose allotted to them in the overall plan. So hit songs, stars, and soap operas have invariable types. So today we might see, the categorization of music that we always fall back to: pop versus rock and roll versus country versus rap versus hip hop. And so everyone sort of has to fit into one, or maybe a couple if they're really avant-garde artists, and those boxes and those categories. But this is another function of another piece that they write here, and maybe this will sound more familiar, that the difference between the Chrysler range and the General Motors products, in cars, of course, is basically illusory, strikes every child with a keen interest in varieties. What connoisseurs discuss as the good or bad points serve only to perpetuate the semblance of competition and the range of choice. The same applies to Warner Brothers and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Productions. So we know these today. So these are brand names that we know still today, even though they've been bought and sort of have changed a bit. Chrysler is still very much an auto brand, so is obviously General Motors is a company. And so, you can extend that to Toyota and Kia and all the others that market cars to us. The same applies to Warner Brothers and MGM. Those are still active brands that make movies. And so an example would be, what connoisseurs discuss as good or bad points serve only to perpetuate the semblance of competition. So which superhero movie do you want to see? Do you want to see the one put out by Disney, or do you want to see the one put out by Warner Brothers? Do you want to see Avengers or Justice League? Depends on which director. Oh, I forgot. The same director directed both. And so, these are mega corporations that are putting out movies, for example. And so what end? So what? So what that they have a semblance of choice? So what there's a narrowing of competition? Well, that speaks to a larger point of the reason why that we're even talking about this, and the reason it matters to media and politics. So this is a function of Adorno and Horkheimer's larger social critique. Again quoting, having ceased to be anything but style, it reveals the latter's secret, obedience to the social hierarchy. By subordinating in the same way and to the same end all areas of intellectual creation, by occupying men's senses from the time they leave the factory in the evening to the time they clock in again the next morning, with matter that bears the impress of the labor process they themselves have to sustain through the day. This subsumption mockingly satisfies the concept of a unified culture with which the philosophers of personality contrasted with mass culture. So the industrialized consequent subsumption which entirely accords with this notion of culture. So, the obedience to the social hierarchy is what they're saying. And you'll see this same kind of theme in Chomsky and Herman that wrote much later and certainly were influenced by Adorno and Horkheimer, that the purpose of mass culture in a society like the current one, or at least the one in the 1940s, the purpose of it is simply to relax the people who provide most of the labor in society, to distract them from the kind of misery of their working conditions. And that's really what the model is overall of the Frankfurt School's critique, as well as the Chomsky and Herman critique. To continue, from Adorno and Horkheimer, it is still possible to make one's way in entertainment if one is not too obstinate about one's own concerns and proves appropriately pliable. Anyone who resists can only survive by fitting in. Whereas today in material production, the mechanism of supply and demand is disintegrating, in the superstructure it still operates as a check in the ruler's favor. The consumers are the workers and employees, the farmers and lower middle class. I'll say that again. The consumers are the workers and employees, the farmers and lower middle class. Capitalist production so confines them body and soul that they fall helpless victims to what is offered to them. As naturally as the ruled always took the morality imposed upon them more seriously than the rulers did themselves, the deceived masses are today captivated by the myth of success even more than the successful are. So here he's talking quite a bit about, or they're talking quite a bit about the fact that in order to make money in entertainment, in the entertainment business, as what we would call today as a creative or a creating person, the only way you can actually make money is to kind of fall in line. And this is examples of this include someone who perhaps gets a degree in English literature and tries to sell a groundbreaking story or book, but ends up trying to make money as a screenwriter in Hollywood, trying to sell the next big superhero movie. And if not superhero movie, then romantic comedy or anything that is kind of the flavor of the week, like maybe a period piece about the Victorian era, or maybe just something that is currently trendy that people are going to the movies to see. And the consumers are the workers and employees. So even though we have this identity as a consumer and the responsible consumer, consumers are simply the people who are providing most of the other labor, and they're further providing labor by providing money, by paying money to the entertainment industry. And again, as naturally as the ruled always took the morality imposed upon them more seriously than did the rulers themselves, the deceived masses are today captivated by the myth of success even more than the successful are. So the myth of success, and this is why, in self-help books and all of the kind of how to get rich quick schemes and kind of selling success as a commodity is something that consumers believe that because they typically consume what they want to experience, then success is maybe just a $45 purchase away, or possibly more expensive, but they can start on the road to success that they don't have at this point simply by continuing their experience as a consumer. What happens at work in the factory or in the office can only be escaped from by approximation to it in one's leisure time. If it is to remain pleasure, it must not demand any effort, and therefore moves rigorously in the worn grooves of association. In other words, do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. This is kind of the the thing that's been sold since the 1980s and 90s. There's even a couple of books called Do What You Love. But the idea that you need to monetize your hobbies, or that you can only escape from work and the kind of 9 to 5 grind, as it were, by making your hobby your work, and by making your work your hobby. And so this is where you can hear a lot of the kind of Silicon Valley and kind of modern kind of get rich quick rhetoric. Further, no independent thinking must be expected from the audience. The product describes every reaction, not by its natural structure, which collapses under reflection, but by signals. Any logical connection calling for mental effort is painstakingly avoided in art. Amusement under late capitalism is the prolongation of work. It is sought after as an escape from the mechanized work process and to recruit strength in order to be able to cope with it again. Fun replaces the pleasure which the sight of an embrace would allegedly afford, and postpones satisfaction till the day of the pogrom, the assault. And this is a kind of anti-Semitic assault. If you're not familiar with pogroms, they were particularly familiar with it, Adorno and Horkheimer. But this is their point. Insofar as cartoons do any more than accustom the senses to the new tempo, they hammer into every brain the old lesson that continuous friction, the breaking down of all individual resistance, is the condition of life in this society. Donald Duck in the cartoons and the unfortunate in real life get their thrashing so the audience can learn to take their own punishment. So I'm not sure if everybody agrees with this critique. Certainly this line has been criticized and talked about, discussed, I should say, in the past. But he's singling out this character in Donald Duck. If you're not too familiar, if you've never watched a Donald Duck cartoon, which is understandable, typically it's Donald Duck being really angry about some unfortunate circumstance in his life. I can recall one where he has to take the bus home to his house, and at his house where he lives alone, he can't get any sleep because this nonstop water keeps dripping from the faucet, no matter what kind of heroic measures he takes to stop the dripping. So he takes his and all kinds of Three Stooges like hilarity ensues, right? Of his misery, and so we laugh at it because we think at the time we can identify with Donald Duck, and so we think maybe he's just getting upset over nothing, and but people can identify that they've gotten angry as well. And there's nothing that they can do about it, is Adorno and Horkheimer's point. Advertising is its elixir of life. Only those who can pay the exorbitant rates charged by advertising agencies, chief of which are the radio networks themselves, that is, only those who are already in a position to do so or are co-opted by the decision of the banks and industrial capital, can enter the pseudo-market as sellers. The costs of advertising, which finally flow back into the pockets of the combines, make it unnecessary to defeat unwelcome outsiders by laborious competition. They guarantee that power will remain in the same hands, not unlike those economic decisions in which the establishment and running of undertakings is controlled in a totalitarian state. So that's their critique, is that even though it seems like there's a lot of freedom in the marketplace, and there's a marketplace of ideas, in fact, those decisions and that marketplace is severely constrained by the existing institutional players in the market. And so to the extent that it's constrained, it's rigged. And if it's constrained, it means that it's going to be only relegated to that which can not harm the core institutional players. And if that's true, then they always essentially have to win or allow for a very, very little acceptable loss within the market. So banks are only going to lend to large banks, especially, are only going to give large loans and to studios that are going to be pumping out really money making ventures. And the studios, by extension, are only going to be taking that money and spending it on films they believe will make money, that are not offensive, that are not controversial, or if they are controversial, only to the extent that people debate over what should have happened in the movie, not what's the content. Is it going to be upsetting to someone? The assembly line character of the culture industry, the synthetic planned method of turning out its products factory-like not only in the studio but more or less in the compilation of cheap biographies, pseudo-documentary novels, and hit songs, is very suited to advertising. The important individual points, by becoming detachable, interchangeable, and even technically alienated from any connected meaning, lend themselves to ends external to the work. The effect, the trick, the isolated, repeatable device have always been used to exhibit goods for advertising purposes, and today, every monster close-up of a star is an advertisement for her name, and every hit song a plug for its tune. Now, there's some more familiar content. So, cheap biographies, most of what you see, if any of you have been to a Barnes & Noble or even a local library, you see the biography section is so outlandishly disproportionate to the rest of the library. It's because they make money. People like to read about other people's lives directly, and that's for leisure. They're not for scholarly consumption. That's why the biography section in the university library is not nearly as large by proportion. Pseudo-documentary novels and hit songs is very suited to advertising. Today, every monster close-up of a star, and he's writing this in 1944, of a star is an advertisement for her name, and every hit song a plug for its tune. So, my era, I would say, was, if I can think of every advertisement for, so when he writes this sentence, who comes to mind? Britney Spears, Rihanna, every hit song a plug for its tune. And so, I don't keep up with music, but I'm sure there's music stars today that you could plug into that as every advertisement of their face and on the cover of Us Weekly or something is a or in your news feed is a reminder that maybe you could listen to their music. All are free to dance and enjoy themselves, just as they have been free since the historical neutralization of religion to join any of the innumerable different sects of religion. But freedom to choose an ideology, since ideology always reflects economic coercion, everywhere proves to be freedom to choose what is always the same. So, choose an ideology. So, freedom to choose an ideology, there's a sentence kind of really, really dripping with irony. Just because you have chosen to follow a pre-prescribed set of notions of what you're supposed to believe as a person, irrespective of your own personal judgment, that's just the freedom to choose to not choose anymore, and to not have freedom anymore, and to choose what is always the same. So if you choose what is always the same in entertainment and mass media, it means you have the freedom to say, I'm a drama viewer, I'm a horror viewer, I'm a Trekkie, I enjoy Star Wars, I'm a Star Wars nerd, all of that kind of stuff is just consumerism, and the freedom to choose an ideology that is you're allowing that lens to be how you can view the world. And maybe as long as you do that consciously, you can have a conversation with the Adorno Horkheimer kind of voice, which is just to say, I'm not sure that I'm choosing what's always the same, but I am choosing maybe some accurately colored lenses through which to view the world. Or maybe you just agree with them and say, yeah, maybe I am. Maybe that's what I'm doing. But I think it needs to be addressed whenever you kind of see someone who is very consciously identifying themselves with a larger ideology. And maybe it's more useful to talk with someone who is unconsciously adopting, or from your own observation has adopted a certain kind of ideology. So, or for you yourself. They continue, the most intimate reactions of human beings have been so thoroughly reified, and that means turned from an idea into a commodity to be consumed, that the idea of anything specific to themselves now persists only as an utterly abstract notion. Personality scarcely signifies anything more than shining white teeth and freedom from body odor and emotions. Advertising. The triumph of advertising in the culture industry is that consumers feel compelled to buy and use its products even though they see through them. So, I mean, it's disturbing, right? And if you're reading it in the spirit in which it's written and meant to be read, and if you at any level agree with Adorno and Horkheimer, you're seeing their point that maybe today personality and individuality is only as good as the ideology that person has chosen to allow to guide their decisions and their uniqueness. He's saying that personality is hollow, and that it's vapid, and that it's not real. And what we choose to call personality is simply physical attractiveness, and the freedom to purchase physical attractiveness and desirability of both in yourself and for other people. The triumph of advertising in the culture industry is that consumers feel compelled to buy and use its products even though they see through them. So even though, you can have a sense of detached irony about a comedy that got 2 stars or no stars, and we can visit, I think they're called in the movies the Razzie Awards, for worst performance every year. Those films that are called terrible kind of laugh all the way to the bank, right? They still get you to watch them. And so Adorno and Horkheimer's point, insofar as it's relevant to the media and the news media specifically, is that if the American news media is performing with the same market logic and the same set of incentives as mass media and advertising do to try to get eyeballs and clicks and to get just as many people wanting to pay attention to them as possible in order to reinforce their more pleasant and agreeable worldview to make it easier for them to work in this society, then that is simply a new derivation or a new iteration of this same phenomenon of attempting to not only wrench every bit of labor power from the economy, but also to kind of double dip it and to make people pay for their own what they call subservience to social hierarchy. So this is something that we could have a longer conversation about, and hopefully we will. But this has been basically me just reading some of the highlights of the culture industry to give you an idea of the main thesis. And so it took a little longer than I intended, so I guess I'll be posting another video about Chomsky and Herman, as well as chapters 5 and 8. Have a good day, and I hope you took some notes. If you didn't, I'll be also posting the slides that I was reading from, so you can read them for yourself and see if maybe you can make some more sense of them than I did. Thanks for watching.